Hey team, welcome to another edition of the Rugby League Lounge weekly show. And once again, joined by Joel from League of Inches. Joel, how are you getting on, my friend?
Good, mate. Good. As I said, we're on that slippery slide at the moment. So finals footage just around the corner. Cannot wait.
Yeah, man, it's exciting times for sure. And even though there's a bit to talk about, but it tends to get a little bit repetitive, you know. We're pretty eager for finals. So it was pretty good timing. This round is retro round. So today we're going to go a little bit behind, go a few years back. Well, basically before I was born, I was a 1997 kid. So we're going to go retro. We're going to go look specifically at the 90s. And I've just conjured up a few questions asked Joel and that I've answered myself. So one I haven't actually asked you, Joel, but just when you think of 90s footy, obviously not being able to watch it, what comes to your mind first off?
Oh, mate, simply the best. For me, I feel like it was. I've sort of seen some clips, and my dad and that spoke to me about it, and always talks to me about the '90s and things like that. And I talk to fans, the older kind, and they say that was probably the pinnacle of the game. The best time of the game was had. There was obviously some intense times with Super League and things like that as well. But all in all, from what I've heard, it was really an exciting time for rugby league. It was a sort of a party atmosphere, and fans were really into it. They were getting bumper crowds pretty much weekly, and the brand of footy was really exciting. So how can you not forget some of the exciting teams that were in the 90s, like the Canberras, you got the Knights, and you got the Broncos, and there were just some really good quality games of football throughout that whole 90s era.
Yeah, nah, for sure, man. Like it feels weird. Like you do hear like 90s was the best, and even though we weren't a part of it, I tend to kind of see why they believe that. And you look across all sports, like I just had a bit of a thought about NBA as well, basketball. It's when like you really obviously Michael Jordan, arguably the best of all time in that sport. I've got him actually behind me. You probably have noticed on numerous episodes, but um, yeah, like it was just everything was starting to become a bit more professional. The competition was high level. I think back in the days, like St. George went on like an 11-year winning streak. I know in NBA, Bill Russell won about 11 finals in the span of like 13 years. So the competition got better, and then we're able to produce better content because of it. It was aired more, yeah, and just everything become more quality. And yeah, so we'll get started with the first question. Now, this is kind of inspired by the Tiger Tales documentary that has just come up. Once again, I feel a bit feel a bit, I don't know, bit left out because I haven't been able to watch it. Being over here in NZ, I have to get a bit better kind of finding a stream. But it got me to ask the question: what is a documentary you'd love to see if you had to go back and watch something from the 90s?
It's probably an obvious one, but I want to go a bit more in depth with the Super League saga and go in depth. I hear stories, Matty Johnson that often say him is about where they actually were taken to restaurants like Macca's to basically get told to sign a contract that it was going to be the best thing for him moving forward. I'd love to have a documentary where we got to go in behind the scenes and sort of got to see those sorts of chats and just how crazy and in depth and intense that sort of time was, because I think a lot of us don't realize just how much the game changed in that side of it and the risk of it moving forward as well. Like whether it was good or bad, that there were some huge changes in play, and I just would love to go back and go behind the scenes with some of the key chats that were had and some of those boardroom meetings. Because I tell you what, it would have been great to be a fly on the wall.
Yeah, you stole the answer, man. And it's one of those things, like we've heard a lot of information, but there's not a lot of that, the visual side of it. And we hear a lot of stories, and it's so fascinating. And even though we probably know a lot from, just from listening to it, but just to actually see it, like you said, be a fly on the wall. The Matty John stories that he always tells about how he was ready. He was ready to take the money offer and go over. And then basically Gus Gould got him and Joe aside and said, "No, you stay here." And it'll just be interesting. And I've also heard another view, like the Super League. Obviously, it didn't pan out. It was not executed well. It only lasted a year, didn't it? Yeah, I think it was only split for a year, man. Like the idea was there, and it'd be interesting to see if there was a bit more thought behind it, if it was, executed a bit better, what the product would be today. It'd be really intriguing. But yeah, that was definitely my answer as well. Another one for me as a Storm fan is just to know a bit more about the Melbourne Storm and how they got started. Obviously, one of the newer clubs coming into the league, and they were able to win a premiership in just their second season. So it'd been awesome to go behind the scenes there, especially seeing Glenn Lazarus go out as a winner for, obviously won multiple premierships elsewhere, but for him to go in second year at the Storm and win one straight at that, yeah, that's pretty sensational as well. So if I wasn't to steal your one, probably that, and also just Origin in general, but that can be covered across MIDI. Like I think the Cattle Dog story was within the 90s as well. So yeah, an in-depth documentary, that would be quite cool. So also something else we obviously, like we said, we didn't watch much footy of 90s because we can only really watch replays, we watch highlights. And even though as footy nerds, we do have a good insight of the legends of our game, we're not, we don't have all the time in the world. We don't have all the access. So that brings the question, who or many of legends, is there one legend that you want to see more of or know more about in terms of their career?
This one I sort of thought a bit about, and I think I've done a bit of a weird, interesting answer. Actually, I actually want to know a bit more about Alfie Langer. And some people might think that is a bit weird because you know quite a bit, but from my point of view, I only know Alfie as a larrikin. You only get told the joking stories about him and how much he loves a drink, and he's the showman of the Broncos, things like that. But he obviously had a really successful career, one of the better players of his generation, and there's obviously a big footy brain behind that persona that we see. So I actually want to see a bit more about and know a bit more about his actual footy brain. And I know it might be boring to some, but that sort of stuff I really love and really enjoy. So it'd be to probably sit, if I ever got the chance to sit down with him and just have a chat about general footy and what it was like, because he was playing against some of the best playmakers of the NRL's ever seen. You got your Brad Fittlers, your Joey Johns. You could name Ricky Stewart. There was some really, really good players back then, and it was one of the top of the crop. So just to know about his footy brain, because as I said, there's the stuff that he's done on the field. There's more than just the jokeman that we all see in that side and in that player.
That was interesting you said that, because I'm like, oh, and I'm like, wait, so do I, because he got a very good point. We see the Larrikin, we see the Origin game when he obviously come back from England and carved up, kind of similar to when Joey Johns made his return to Origin as well. And, we know the success he had, but I just like to pick apart his brain, because obviously, we just see him now on the sidelines, giving it to New South Wales boys or whoever he's training for, the opposition. So yeah, he's got that obviously funny side about him, but obviously to be one of the best halfback the game can see, we know that you have to be pretty, have to be a lot going on out there. And, it's actually funny when you think about the larrikins that we see in the halves position, and how they were able to kind of switch personalities once they got on the field, but still provide a little bit of niggle as well. And my answer actually is two halves as well. And there's two guys that really get compared in that, some of the greatest halves we've seen, but kind of that tier below. And I think it's a bit to do with the competition they go up against, and also, I'm just going to explain it by this. They're quite a nuggety looking type. They don't look like, standout athletes, not like some of the great halves do, but you think, how were they so great? And that's Terry Lamb and that's Cliff Lyons. My two answers. And this to bring up a point, and I forgot to bring up the premierships before, but I believe they both won premierships in the 1990s as well. And we just talked about the competition they go up against. And it's, a great feat, but you just watch them and there's not much highlights, but they just had this ability to play make, even though you look at them and you think, how did they get it done? But they just seem to move across the field in a weird way and just know how to find their teammates. I think Cliffy Lyon was a part of that great try that they scored against Great Britain as well. I don't know if I believe I got that right. But yeah, and also his connection with Steve Menzies on Clarkie's post the other day. He put up the top try scores. He's number 3, and I just think I understand he played 349 games. And funny enough, Terry Lamb, who else we're talking about, he was just one above him, 350 games. But Steve Menzies had about 170, 180 odd tries, and I understand he played a lot of games, but he's a back rower. But their connection was just freakish, and I just love to. I would pay to watch all the times it was a try. It was Lions to Menzies. It would be great to see. And Terry Lamb, just to finish off with him, yeah, I've heard of his name being brought up in lights as well about I think he's a Hall of Fame player, but even maybe skimming the kind of immortal conversation as well. I've heard before, obviously not as pronounced as the Lockyers and Fittlers, but yeah, just love to know a bit more about them and hopefully get more access to highlights in the near future. Now we'll go on to the next question. A player type that would have thrived in today's game in the 90s. So you can start us off. If you're struggling with this one, Joel, I don't mind kicking it off because it was probably kind of a hard one to digest, but fire away if you've got an answer.
I've got one. I'd actually love to see the young Brad Fittler in amongst this day and age, because he had such a good footy brain that I think that lacks these days. And I think his smartness would just tear oppositions apart. And I think the last player that had a similar footy brain was probably Cooper Cronk and Cam Smith, but they've both obviously left the game now. I think especially this year with those two not here and Jonathan Thurston not here, the game's really missing that real footy guy. And Nathan Cleary can probably be the next one, but he's still a little bit fresh. But I would have just loved to see Fittler control the game with his skill, with his brain. He's not the fastest, not the most skillful, but he's just got that footy brain. He can just get in there, get things done, dictate terms, and I really think he'd actually really do well in this sort of a game, especially with a lot more tired forwards getting around with the new rule changes and things like that. So, and the less interchanges than there was back then. So, yeah, I'd have to say Freddie Fittler.
I think that's a really great answer. Yeah, like you said, the ruck speed is at an all-time high, I should say. So to be able to have that playmaking ability and just such an all-round footballer, like you said, he is definitely going to take advantage of that. And especially if you say he's like at his peak of his powers, really knows his craft, or watch out defenses. Yeah, that's a really good answer. And also, just to summarize your point, I'm actually going to give this guy a shout out later on, but really, he's really going to be a good promotion here today. The Rugby League Guru always says if he could clone one player and they just fill your whole team, 13, 17, Brad Fittler would be the answer, and I completely understand that answer. I miss watching Freddie play, but I definitely see when I watch highlights, he is so well-rounded and at such an elite level. And to answer that question, my answer is I always think Luke Lewis. He's a guy that I always answer for that because, like you've seen, he was won a premiership as a winger, won a premiership as a second round, and can play in the halves a lot. That's going off topic, but that would be my answer for that question. Now, mine would be, you mentioned him a little bit briefly earlier, but Ricky Stewart, and also Alfie as well, just that natural halfback. Now, I think in today's game, look, Joe John brings it up a bit. They get coached so much how to run structures, very much methodical kind of ways of playing, that they just really don't play what they see. They expect everything to kind of be, go through the motions as such. Eyes up footy is definitely kind of missing in a lot of young halves game, and it's really hard to see. We always talk about, now Nathan Cleary is fantastic, but there's a clear gap between him and the rest, and I think that is the main skill that's there. And he is a structured half as well to a degree as well, but he has really come of age. But yeah, he's just been able to pick his moments. Yes, play the structure, but don't rely on it. And Ricky Stewart was fantastic. He had such an all-round skill set. He one of the best playmakers when I look back at highlights, and a variety of kicks, the variety of passes he had in his arsenal. And when we talk about Alfie Langer, just that fearless mentality to take on the line, even though you're a smaller bloke. Now, I understand probably got more physically, you know, physically dominating athletes now. But at the end of the day, there was, a bit more leniency with the shoulder charges and all that back in the day. So it would have been just as scary back then to take on the line. So for me, it would have been that kind of eyes up footy half, the one that really took the game by the scruff of the neck. Any comments on that one, or should we move on to?
Oh, mate, I agree with you. I think it's, as I said when I mentioned the one that footy brain at the moment, I feel has lacked a lot, especially this year. There's that golf, so I think those sorts of players would absolutely have a field day.
Yeah, no, for sure, man. And we're just going to talk about similarities in today's game. I'll be very interested to know. We'll go into that one. Yeah, similarities in today's game. So things that you see kind of still, they were there in the 90s and they're still there today. Anything in particular kind of, set up a light bulb for you?
Look, I actually don't think there's not much at all. I think the game's changed quite a bit, and we hear this all the time for people saying, "I wish the game would go back to how it used to be played, and it was a better product all round." I don't think. I thought about this quite a bit this afternoon. I can't really point my finger at anything. If I can say something about the last month, it's obviously the try celebrations. That used to be a big thing back in the 90s. People used to get into it, but that's only a sort of a once-off promotion. I hope it keeps going because it is good to watch, but I think the game has changed a lot. So there's some good things and some bad things that have changed, but overall, I feel like from the 90s to the game we have now, it's a huge difference. And that's one of the reasons why, for me personally, when I look at stats, and it's so hard to compare eras and things like that, and always doing these greatest teams of all time, because they all play with different sort of rules and the way things were and all that sort of thing. So, for mine, to find similarities, I got to tell you, I don't think there's much at all.
Yeah, nah, for sure, man. I kind of had a bit of trouble on this one too, but I thought of Victor Radley, and I think he kind of resembles a lot of what's in today's game and then what's kind of used to be back in the day. Look, I don't really associate anyone particular with like that ball playing. I think it's a lot more finesse now, and I think teams kind of, use, like I've heard a lot now, the spine is now 5 players, including the lock. It wasn't quite like that, but there was some skillful forwards back in the day, and you saw that in the off. There was a bit more freedom to offload the ball. Obviously, Victor Radley's more of a, he will engage the line, then pass, rather than he's less of an offloader than some players, but he had that ball playing ability. He's a workhorse. He gets into it. That was a trait that we used to see in a lot of the older players. And personality, you can't, and I think we are doing a better job of now embracing personalities in the game. There's a little bit of a fine line there still, but I think, when I think of the 90s, I do think of those bubbly personalities, and Victor Radley is one of them. Also with Victor Radley as well is, look, he got in a bit of Barney rubble about it, the game against the Broncos, when he got put on report about 4 times, but hey, he still wants to bring that aggression, and that was definitely there in the 90s, and obviously they're trying to rule out the game for good reasons sometimes too, obviously safety first, and we've got a brand to protect as well. So I understand that. But Victor Radley actually summarizes for me a lot of today's game and the game that we used to see back in the day. I realized I skipped over a couple of questions, my man. So we'll quickly go. So we talked about player types that would have thrived in the 90s. Is there anyone in particular from now that would have thrived back in the 90s?
I think Latrell Mitchell, a really big body. He's big, fast, skillful, really strong. I think that's similar to your Mal Meninga type figure from back in the 90s, and I think that would do exactly the same as what Mal Meninga did. And I just think he's an absolute freak. He's a class player. I know he's got some doubters out there from previous years, but I tell you what, back in the day, if he was centre, apart from Mal Meninga, there's probably not many that can contain him. So I reckon Latrell back in the 90s would just cause absolute mayhem.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. Hey, yeah, no, for sure. It would have been interesting. I think would have been interesting to see if he would have rivaled Mal and just envision the centre matchups they would have had in Origin, and
Oh,
even probably the more realistic one would have been obviously not in the 19s, but only a couple of years ago. It would have been cool to see him and GI both in their prime. But yeah, we can only dream about that. But I've gone with my favourite player of all time, Billy Slater. Obviously, Billy has been kind of tagged as one of the guys that kind of changed the game, or should I say, changed the way the fullback role was played. And it would have just been interesting to see if that was introduced a bit early in the 90s, and would have probably really changed the fabric of it, how we saw 90s. Obviously, he was a hard worker, his high intensity work was just unbelievable, but obviously added that playmaking ability when his career developed. So it just would have been interesting how that would have translated earlier on, because I think I think the footy was obviously starting to change. It was a bit more, a bit more structured than that. So it kind of, looked, obviously it seemed like a smooth transition. It would have seen if you just put them in there, he had all the knowledge that he has now from what he learned, and see there would have just been really interesting to see. So for me, Billy would have been interesting, and it would have been interesting to see what other players once Billy did it. Obviously, we've seen Teddy, we've seen Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, and obviously heaps of others now kind of adapt. It would have been to see the other legends that would have picked apart his game as well, because fullbacks back then, they were just kind of runners of the football. Lockyer was able to Lockie kind of introduced it as well. He had a little bit of playmaking game, but not to the same level as Slater, or the same effect that Slater had, I believe. But I could be a bit biased because he is my favourite player of all time. Now we're going to get
on a
on.
lot of Clive Churchills.
What was that, so?
He would have won a lot of Clive Churchills back then.
Yeah, for sure. Good point. Now we're going to go into a player that probably, depending on the era, his game might have changed. So we're going to do an example for both. So is there anyone from the 90s that you think might have had a completely different role playing today?
I reckon E.T., Andrew Anyhausen, played most of his career sort of in that centre position, played a bit of wing and fullback as well. I actually think these days, if he was playing, he would have actually made a 5'8", and a pretty good one, a bit of a ball runner, got a bit of skill as well. So, I've gone the old E.T. He's off doing his fishing adventures now, but I think if he was to if he was to be playing at the moment, I think he'd be that sort of 5'8" role.
Mate, I loved it when discovered off topic, but I saw the other day you were watching as well. I'm a big Survivor fan. He was on the All Stars, and seeing him pop up, I was like, oh my god, ET, and seeing him do the old fishing shows. He was doing the Fish of Origin, I believe, with JT and a few of the others. So it was really cool to see. But that's an interesting one. I think, obviously, it would have been interesting to see how he would have translated into a different role there. But I do see that uses speed and a different dynamic there. So I like that answer. And I've gone with Mal Meninga, because you compare him to Latrell, and I say, but when I look back, and maybe it might be in comparison with who he was up against, but man, he looked bigger than GI. He looked bigger than Latrell, but he looked more a bit broader. Like I think Latrell and GI, obviously, I think they were more athletic and had more speed. So for me, and I was actually, and this is where I was going to shout the guru at, he said that he probably thought he would be in the back rower potential as well. And I see that. I think, the body type he was and the abilities that he was able to display.
David Fafita, like.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just to kind of, exactly. And just to swing into my next one, it's kind of someone that I think they would kind of reverse roles. I think a bit more mobile, a bit more athletic. I think Jason Tamalolo would have been interesting to see. I reckon he might have been like the Mal back in the day. I reckon he might have shifted them out to the right centre. Do you think that would have been a possibility, or do you think, they would have stuck in the middle?
I can't see him as an outside back. I would have kept him in the middle. I think he would have been even more devastating. So,
Mm.
if anything, maybe a second rower and just be that edge damaging back rower. But yeah, I don't know if they change him too much.
Because I know he's not like his biggest appeal isn't footwork, but I think if his footwork compared to the forwards back then, and yes, you could think, oh, well, then take advantage of that. But I
Mm.
wonder if the process of thinking back then would have been not to do that and just thought, oh no, the mobile, athletic, um, good footwork players play in the centre. So that's what we'll do here, and we've got the best one of the lot. So yeah, it would have been interesting. Was there any player that you would have seen that might have changed roles that's currently playing in today's game that would play differently in the 90s?
I actually would have thought Gutho would do a pretty good job at five, at like a 5'8" with a dominant half. So I could really picture him playing alongside someone like Ricky Stewart or Andrew Johns, and just he's got a real good engine on him. So he would just run all day for him, run off him. He's a really good support player as well. So the Knights, for instance, had a really good forward pack back then. Same with the Raiders and things like that. So for him, I think back then the footy players are real sort of tough footy players that just got up after a hit. That's sort of how Gutho plays his footy now. He's not the spectacular, most skillful player out there, but he just doesn't stop. And I think that would have really suited the 90s sort of style and how they all sort of played the game back then.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I definitely would have seen that. And Gaffo is like a Swiss Army knife in a way. He's obviously filled in a few different positions and found his home at fullback.
Mm,
But yeah, I could definitely see that. But he definitely has that old style footy feel about him. Just a pure
yeah.
footballer, like we talked about with Freddie Fittler earlier before. My answer to this, oh no, I've already said my answer. Sorry, we'll move on to the next question. But yeah, no, I think yeah, for me, Jace and Tamalolo, Jace and Meninga. Yeah, I could just see them switching. Could just really see them switching. But we're gonna finish off. Now this is really
Jeez,
hard.
imagine that as a player. Imagine Jason Meninga playing
Jason
together.
Meninga.
Goodness me. Oh, that is the ultimate footballer right there, guys.
Oh,
Jason Meninga together. Just add in a bit of JT's feet, and you're all good. Wow.
yeah. And they would have been able to play both for Tonga and Maroons, and there would
Oh,
have been no eligibility
Jesus.
at all.
Wow.
All right. We'll finish off with a bit of fun one now. It's pretty hard sometimes to obviously determine who would have been your favorite player, because obviously you get caught up in the moment. A lot of it can be time and a lot of it can be who you start supporting. Because for me, I remember like Billy Slater was the first name I saw kind of on TV and the highlights stuck out and watched the Storm. So that's kind of how I become a bit of a fan of the Storm and Slater. So, but who do you believe you would have found yourself rooting for Joel or any player in particular, even a team in particular? I mean,
Yeah.
think
I
your family would have still had an influence, or yeah,
Yeah, well, look, I wanted to go away from the para side of things for this video, so I chose not to choose an ex-para player from the 90s. I've gone two players for mine who I get attracted to the speed machines, the excitement machines. I really like that in the playoffs. Why I love players like the Fox at the moment.
yeah,
For mine, I would have loved Steve Renouf. He was an absolute freak back for the Broncos, and that black headgear that he had, he was just an absolute speed machine. The other one I really, really, I actually got to watch him a couple of times. I can remember briefly is Brett Mullins.
right.
As a fullback, ball running fullback, he was a crazy player, and he scored some thrilling length of the field tries. And he was really the first player for mine to put that real running fullback into play and just show how dangerous having a good fullback can be for your side. And I think he was there for the Roosters and then the Raiders for a bit as well. And I just feel like both him and Renouf for mine would have been the two players I would have followed if it wasn't for my Parramatta allegiances.
It's quite funny. Then there weren't my two answers, but it's funny. I thought of them, and Reynolds one. I just remember that try that he scored against the Dragons. Was fantastic. Just speed to burn, and Brett Mullins that try, the chip and chase. Probably the best chip and chase try I've seen. Kicked it over. If our viewers or listeners aren't familiar, basically chipped it over the top of the defensive line. Got a bit of a bounce. Couldn't catch on the full. Had to kick it on the run as well. without catching it. And then perfectly set up over the fullback and scored. Yeah, so, and that probably goes back to my question earlier. He's someone I'd like to know a little bit more about as well. Yeah, no, some great answers. Yeah, I actually thought you were going to say Nathan Blacklock there for a second. Probably played a bit of both eras as well, but yeah, he was one that come to mind too. His chip and chase try, I believe, to win. Oh, I can't remember who it was against, but yeah, beautiful try that was, and speed to burn. Unlucky not to. I think he only played one game for Australia. He might have not even played for New South Wales. It's just crazy to think about that. But look, if I had to answer the Storm, look, I might have actually been attracted to Storm because, hey, there was a new team on the block. I could support someone new. And then the guy that stuck out for me was Taria Nikau, being a Kiwi as well, and was fantastic in that grand final. Was just, I watched that grand final, and every time he had a contact with someone, this is how I'd sum up his performance. Every time he hit someone, every time he was just an individual battle, he'd win that battle. It wasn't anything splash. It wasn't as memorable as a grand final performance like Benji with the flip pass or anything sensational like that. But man, he was just in everything. But if it was just someone just purely talent based that I kind of, and I think about Billy and I think about the type of player I like, I think about Brandy Alexander. And I also like how he presents himself in today's game as well, and commentary as well. Soft spoken, obviously, got a good footy brain, and yeah, it's not a calm, cool character. But watching him play, and I'm going to shout him out again. I was listening because I was thinking, Guru put a podcast out about Loz. Who would you rather have, Loz or Brandy? And I thought, I'm going to listen to this. And he summed it up brilliantly why I love Greg Alexander. Obviously, he had the speed, he had the skill, he had the playmaking ability, he had the ability to play halfback and fullback. So nice, well-rounded skill, and just also Guru mentioned that he could play on the wing as well, but he summed it up really well. He was a great instinctive footballer. He was able to utilize those skills to a full advantage because he just knew where that ball was going to bounce. He just knew what the defensive line was where the defensive line was going to be. And it was actually interesting listening to that podcast. I didn't actually realize the tragedy that had happened and why he had to leave the Panthers, because his brother passed away in 1992, I believe. So that was a year after he won the premiership. Which is really sad news to hear. And then obviously had a stint at the Warriors as well to finish off his career. So yeah, that was kind of some sad news to hear after wanting to know a bit more about his footy. But he was Rookie of the Year in his first year and Dally M Player of the Year the next year after. So sensational achievement. But yeah, for me, he just had this freshness about him and this young look about him that kind of, even though he didn't have the similar play style to Billy, there were similar traits that did kind of attract me to Billy Slater that would have attracted me to Brandy as well. So I think he would have been my answer. Do you have any little memories about Brandy, mate, or just kind of what you see on the commentary team?
Yeah, sort of. I don't have any memories of him. Obviously, he was one of those freak sort of players, and just I sort of second what you say, just how he holds himself. He is enough himself. He doesn't have that demeanor about him. He's just a really good, honest worker, and obviously, that would just translate from how he was on the footy field. And he talks about often Brad Fittler talks about if he didn't have Alexander at the club when he first was coming through, he probably wouldn't have been the player that he ended up being. And that's, for mine, a huge statement for what Brownie Alexander is like, and not just as a player, but as a person. And I think the best players out there are generally the best people off the field as well. So he obviously has both of those in spades, and one of the guys I'd really love to sit down with one day and just have a yarn to and just talk all things footy, because he does some wonderful things for both Penrith and the Blues at the moment, and it's clear he's just got one of those. I'd probably say arguably probably the top 5 footy brains in the game at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. He is one of those faces when I see on TV, I listen. He's just got that demeanor about him. And I think you actually touched on, we talked about similarities earlier. I think at the end of the day, the best players are probably the best people. They still carry themselves with pride, and they showed it in the footy as well. So I think there was some nice words to finish off the pod. So I think the video, I should say. So we'll leave it there. I'd love to thank you, Joel, for coming on and talk a bit of retro footy there. Obviously, it feels a bit funny because, like we said, we weren't able to watch it, and sometimes it feels like, how can you value our opinion when we weren't there? But it's cool for us to reflect, go back in time, and yeah, to think, what could have been as fans back then. So I really appreciate you coming on, Joel. And if you got any final little plugs or words, just yell them out, mate.
I actually still remember to this day where I was when that penalty try was given in the Dragons versus Melbourne Storm grand final. So I do have a little bit of memories about the 90s. It's only very late, but I was driving. I wasn't personally driving, but I was sitting in the
That's like
car
jeepers.
on the way back from Sydney down to Wollongong, and was on the radio. So I was listening to that, and it was me and my dad in the car, and I remember just basically went silence as soon as the referee made that call, and we didn't get to watch it until we got home. But wow, I can still picture it to this day. I was in shock, and I was only 8 or 9 years old back then. So it's crazy, this sort of game and the memories it leaves you with.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And we'll leave it there, guys. Once again, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you guys next week. Cheers.